and welcome to Digital Health Inside Out podcast. As thousands of our loyal fans know, we created this channel to talk about specific topics in digital health and everything related, and to invite best experts to discuss the topic. But then we realized that we missed so much because so much happening in the health tech space, all kind of news. And we came up with this innovative idea. I don't think anyone ever done this before. News discussion. We invited amazing lineup of experts today to discuss some of the latest news in health tech. So traditionally, we have my co-host Sergei Polevikov. We also have Ben Schwartz. And last but not least, Renard. Hi, Rick. Let's do really short intros so everybody who's going to watch this knows kind of who we are and what we do. I'll lead by example. I'm Alex. I'm a CEO and co-founder of YODD, a medical device for telehealth, an early stage startup, and also a co-founder of Beaky, which is an AI development firm focused on healthcare. Sergey, you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sergei Polevikov. I'm also digital health founder, Will AI, which is a partnership with Chart to Chart right now. We help build virtual platforms for patients and doctors. And I also have my AI Health Uncut Substack. And also together with Alex, we have a podcast, Digital Health Inside Out. This is where we are, yes.
Good job, Sergey. Thanks. Ben?
Yeah, Ben Schwartz, orthopedic surgeon by training, recently left practice to join Commons Clinic, where we're building the next generation multi-specialty clinic. Right now focused on orthopedics, MSK, driving cases to lower cost sites of service and engaging in risk-bearing contracts to drive down costs.
Yeah, Rick, once was a nurse, but then realized that I'm not very good at taking orders from doctors and I'm a bit too stubborn. So then decided to build in healthcare instead of being at the bedside. So right now working at Story Intelligence, where we take some of our internal built AI care managers that we helped or used to scale our own care operations and selling that now as SaaS solutions across governments, health plans, and big health systems across Europe and the US. Nice to meet you all.
Incredible. All right, let's get straight to the news that we selected for today's episode. And the first one is Hippocratic AI raised 126 million Series C, bringing total funding to $404 million, valuing the company around $3.5 billion. The company pitches voice-first care agents for use cases like outreach, scheduling, benefits questions, and chronic care workflows. Sergey, you wrote an article on this just recently, so kick things off and tell us what you think about this news.
I'm excited about AI agents in general. I think it's a smart way to start with this voice agents just to try it out. I think that we have a pretty kind of solid marketplace as I look around. I like the market, the area. I just think that currently technology isn't there yet, to be completely honest with you. We're getting there, but just the fact that, in Hippocratic's case, for instance, they need human interventions and kind of reviews for almost every call. That's my understanding. Kind of tells us where we are, but that's definitely the future. I mean, Hippocratic has its own problems. As I mentioned in the article, they deceive their clients. They manipulate financial numbers. They do all sorts of crazy stuff, but that's kind of like separate to Hippocratic AI. But in general, I'm excited about the era. I'm just saying it's just early, and Hippocratic kind of shows the sign of that. The numbers are big. I think valuations are crazy and should be nowhere, as the press release suggests. But as I've been writing about this area, if you are close to the Silicon Valley venture capital bros, you get all the money, but not necessarily doing the most innovation.
Wait, so you're saying that 3.5 billion is too high?
Yeah, I mean, I think people know they're not making nearly as much as some of their competitors in terms of, like, for instance, revenue multiples and some other financials. So in my article, if you look at the numbers are getting crazier to, like, Theranos numbers before they collapsed. Because as it turned out, I'm not saying Hippocratic is lying, they may not, but turned out Theranos numbers were completely made up after the SEC eventually took a look at it. My parallel was to Theranos just because there seemed to be a lot of misleading information and lies, and it kind of smells like a lot of that was happening before Theranos collapsed. And that's why I'm making that comparison, especially financials, but also lying to your clients, which I think is just not a good way to do business.
So do you think the technology, you said we're not there yet. I mean, do you think that they're selling an idea of a technology that doesn't exist, can't exist, or won't exist in the timeline and the valuation that they're suggesting? I mean, because Theranos obviously had, they didn't have a product that actually did what it said they supposed to do. You can argue that that's the case here, but there might be a more viable pathway for them to get there versus what Theranos was suggesting, which it just, it was a physics problem that you couldn't solve, nobody's been able to solve, versus this might just be a time and, money and resources thing, or do you disagree?
I agree technology could get there. I'm not sure if Hippocratic is going to do it. Maybe somebody else. I actually believe that I don't know, in my view, the most reasonable way to get there is not with LLMs, but with the next generation AI that, hopefully is coming. I think personally, transformers have issues, and especially for agents, because, right now we're talking about just, making voice calls and, understanding, summarizing. But in general, if you look at what nurses are doing, for instance, and, Munjal Shah's been talking about like replace the nurses, then his rhetoric changed all of a sudden. Now he's being careful, I guess, what he says. But like if you look at humans, they're doing as you know, obviously, they're doing multi-stage tasks. Right now, AI agents are doing one-stage task, and they're still hallucinating, they're still making mistakes. Once you add stages, once you add tasks, as those errors accumulate exponentially. And so I think technology will be there. They're just not there yet, and I'm not sure Hippocratic is going to get there. There are other great innovators in the space, in my opinion.
I think LTech nerds wrote or like summarized it pretty well. So like Hippocratic is building the vision of like, hey, we're going to build the nursing workforce of the future, and actually its biggest customers are currently using them for spammy robot calls because they were like mentioning a customer case with one of their health systems, and they were doing, I think, 1 call per business day for 10 days or something. Like, if I would get 10 calls from the same number over 10 days, I would be going mental. It's like, what is going on? Like, leave me alone. And so I agree that right now the technology is definitely not there to replace nurses. I was probably not a top performer nurse. I was below average as a nurse, but whatever we were doing, it was not just phone calls. And we do a lot of voice AI deployments with Sword as well. And we do it for non-clinical cases right now, like appointment confirmations, like all of the administrative stuff. And we are getting to a point where it's like getting very, very well. But to Sergei's point, like it's not perfect at all because it's LLMs in the end. And a good analogy that I like to say is like, whenever you would manage a care organization, you also need to manage thousands of nurses and doctors. You also will never be able to guard the same level of quality all the time because you don't know what that nurse is saying to that patient in that room. So with LLMs, it's the same. So like you will need to accept that nothing will be perfect, and it will never be perfect, because whoever is claiming, you have some vendors right now that really is pissing me off, like safe AI and no hallucination LLMs. Like that's not possible. Like you're just bullshitting your customers, and you look so silly. But like, deploy it in use cases where it can make indeed mistakes. And of course, with guardrails, you can make sure that it doesn't make crazy mistakes, but don't deploy it in like medical device type of area without going through like all the hard work of getting that medical device certification and stuff as well.
In my opinion, like I'm gonna make this claim that when we think about any AI technology being used, especially for things like diagnostics, but also like multi-stage agentic stuff, I don't know. To me, analogy is like, we're not there with AGI yet, and to me, like medicine is almost like we have to think about it as AGI. It has to be really good. It has to be kind of comparable to really smart, human doctors and nurses, and there have to be guardrails. So, if in my view, when I'm thinking about AGI and how far we are as of today from AGI, to me, it's like it's almost like that gap between where we are in AI and where we want to be in healthcare. This is how I think about it.
Yeah, I think this touches on another one of the topics that we have on the list of discussions, but it's the challenges in using AI, particularly for replacing nurses or doctors, are it's unpredictable, like where the hallucinations are going to come from. It may hallucinate something differently each time you use it, and so it's unpredictable. And if you're not able to identify that, it kind of slips through. I mean, it's easier to fix a problem that's repeatable and predictable versus one that you don't know where and when it's going to come from. And then when it makes those mistakes, it's very sort of confident or very convincing that it is correct. And so it makes it even harder to sort of question. If you don't know, if you don't have the experience to question or pick up on when it's getting wrong, it's very convincing. It's very easy to convince you that it is right. I think the other thing too is particularly GPT-5 and 5.1 seem to be tuned to be agreeable to you and kind of pick up on your own biases and reflect what you're putting into it. And so I think it's very easy to go down this road of, if you're using it for diagnosis or medical information, it's going to tell you what you want to hear and doesn't have the complete information, and that can lead to very dangerous, low value, dangerous care type of road, as opposed to a human being.
I think that the example of like GPT agreeing is perfect for healthcare as well. Like perfect example of why we need different things. Like, for example, you have a lot of articles around, or like AI around mental health. And if you would use a standalone model like GPT, it would agree with everything that you say. But like the basis of good therapy is actually not a therapist that agrees with everything that you're saying, but actually pushes you back and like disagrees and actually makes you think outside of your current bubble. And off-the-shelf LLMs are definitely not ready for that. So indeed, that's why we need sort of like a different approach to what Sergei was saying as well, I think.
I feel like you covered like half of the news that was selected already, but I actually want to get us back to the initial article. And my question is, regarding Hippocratic AI, obviously everybody understands valuation is too high. And I think it's similar just to AI bubble that everybody's talking about for multiple companies in the AI space, not healthcare specific. All of those valuations are kind of high with all those circular deals from OpenAI, NVIDIA, and many others. So the question is, and I'll address this to you, Sergei, in the first place, because you wrote the article. Don't you think it's a normal process? And the first analogy I can give you is Waymo. They spent tons of money. The cars were driving in San Francisco with drivers and learning the algorithm. What algorithm was learning that at that point. And then they made it, and they actually have autonomous cars in multiple cities now. Don't you think Hippocratic AI in healthcare space goes similar paths? Yes, they use human in the loop to validate what they have right now, but mostly to educate algorithm and make sure that it can work without a human very soon.
Yeah, so the answer is kind of twofold. So first of all, when you talk about outliers, obviously there are cases where the growth is so high that it kind of like the company's valuation it kind of grows into where it's predicted to be. So maybe if we're saying like it's gonna be next year, and now all this AI, as startups, some of them just grow exponentially. Lovable cursor outside of healthcare, obviously, but like crazy growth. I do feel like we're talking about outliers, and also like that's why I had in my article that peer comparison, because like yes, possible Hippocrates are gonna grow into those numbers, but like every time they make a round, the numbers are getting crazier. So every time I feel like financial analysts are getting more skeptical and more skeptical. I have a story for you because I've interviewed so many people from Hippocratic. So there was an interview that Munjal was conducting. That's not actually this story is not in my article. It was just so much stuff I actually forgot to include it. It was for some high level position at Hippocratic, and he made the statement basically to this person. So it's basically like from the words of the interviewee, right? So Munjal basically saying, well, it's my job to make valuation as high as possible. It's somebody else's job to explain them. So, and that's kind of like tells me like where these people are. Basically, they got their shares for initial, obviously for nothing. Employees, by the way, as I mentioned in my article, they have to purchase those shares, and they cannot get rid of them as easily. There's obviously a liquidity problem. So they're inflating prices just because the goal is to flip them very often. So they don't really care what's going to happen next. And this is exactly what happened with Munjal's previous company, Health IQ, right? He kind of like moved on, and whoever picked up the pieces, which in this case happened to be patients and vendors. I've talked to vendors of Health IQ, and every one of them was basically saying, I was screwed by Munjal Shah, and before even going into bankruptcy court, he picked up the next round of financing for his next company. So I don't know. It just seems to me, why is this happening in digital health? I think it's happening everywhere, but it's kind of painful when it's happening in healthcare because like so many, potentially uninvolved people often pick up the slack after this guy's mistakes.
Yeah, I think healthcare is just an easy target because it is so expensive, and it's so easy to tell a story of, here's this very inefficient, very expensive industry. There's no question we can come in there and we can have a great business and we can fix all these problems. I think it's very easy to sort of paint this very negative, high cost, low value, American healthcare is broken story, and people buy into that. And the reality is obviously a lot messier and a lot harder to, bring value rather than extract value.
I actually want to finish this on a positive note because we're all like talking negatively. I do believe, I am waiting for the next generation. I'm not smart enough to invent the next generation of AI models, but like, I feel like something beyond transformers where we think about guardrails, we think about, benchmarks, like everybody's beating benchmarks all of a sudden, if you train a particular benchmark, you're going to beat it. So that's kind of like, especially in like clinical setting is just, to me, it's just ridiculous. But I do, I've seen this like recently. I mean, obviously things like, there are things that are kind of positive to me, like, smartwatches with various ways to measure, heartbeat and, predict when you may have a heart attack. Like I was reading the article, and there's some interesting positive news. And also like the very recent one on digital twins, which also use LLMs, but they're actually, I think it was actually GPT-5 because it's like brand new. There's some interesting discoveries there. So I think there are innovators in the area, and I'm excited about them. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are also people who are, in here for some alternative reasons, maybe, making money or whatever. And so we have to kind of be aware of that. And especially for patients and medical community, we have to communicate and, speak up about that. That's kind of my opinion.
And maybe Hippocratic surprises us, and maybe they are building the nursing workforce of the future. And I hope they do, because like we have insane shortages in every country, and like we need many, many, many more nurses to get to care or provide the care that people actually need. So I hope your article is very wrong, and they're like crushing it and changing the world.
Yeah, and I'll have to write a lot of letters of apology then, but that's okay.
Yeah, I hope Sergei is wrong all the time, to be honest. That's just my personal view. Let's move on to LLMs and then our next news. So Sam Altman called GPT-5 the best model ever for health, saying it could save a lot of lives. And yet, Tina Hernandez Bussard, I apologize if I pronounced the last name incorrectly, and her colleagues write in Nature Medicine that while GPT-5 shows progress in reducing hallucinations, it still fails in over half of difficult clinical scenarios. And meanwhile, I think another important thing is, medical disclaimers have nearly disappeared from AI outputs, down from 26% in 2022 to less than 1% today. So we don't have basically any medical disclaimers for chat users. Rick, what do you think about this news?
So it's similar what I was saying in the beginning, sort of like indeed ChatGPT has many flaws. Like behavioral health is one example, which I think we will also talk a little bit more in depth later in the podcast. To me, it means a few things. So the first thing is that I always look at it from like a consumer perspective and then from an enterprise perspective. I think on the enterprise, what we are also seeing internally is that we need sort of like smaller models that are specifically trained with specific guardrails to do specific things. Which obviously is also cheaper, but like that's the only way that we can get to the accuracy that we see internally. So not like one big model to rule them all. And I might be very wrong in that because some people say like, no, the bigger the model, the better the output, but we see the opposite on many sides. So I think that's what will happening in enterprise. Like we will have a specific model for scribing, a specific model for that, a specific model for that, a specific model for mental health, for example. And then on the consumer side, I think it was this week that the New York Times also was mentioning or posting an article about patients using AI for whatever reason because their doctors had no time to talk to them. And I think that's also very true. Like whenever I go to the doctor, I have like 5 minutes of conversation, sometimes when I'm lucky 10, and they're mostly on their computer typing things, and often they don't really listen. And then you can argue like go find a better doctor, which I would agree with, but like my experience has been almost the same all the time. So I think from a consumer perspective, there is definitely a need to create sort of like a model that is more healthcare focused, that can really become that front door whenever you need health advice, that like you go to that model and it's like more trained on specific things that the patient can get real advice on. So like an open evidence, but then on like the consumer side. And my assumption is that OpenAI is definitely building towards that direction. Like they're hiring healthcare people, consumer people, the person from Instagram. Like I think they will double down on the consumer piece and having specific more safe models, because pure safety doesn't exist. I think would be very smart.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's just a matter of right now. Obviously, people are going to the models that they have access to, which are just the base, ChatGPT and Claude that anybody can sign up for, and assuming that what they're getting is accurate or trustable. And I think that's an issue. I think they recently changed their EULA to reflect that it's not for medical advice, but of course you can't stop people from using it that way. Can you get people to use more focused models that are less likely to make a mistake? And I think the other question is, what responsibility and liability are they going to take? Is there going to be a Section 230 for AI the way there is for social media, where they aren't necessarily responsible, or they don't claim responsibility for things that happen on the platforms? To me, it'll be interesting to see how that's legislated.
I feel like we still haven't figured out the social media part. And does it look like we're gonna figure out the AI part anytime soon?
I think the assumption is that ultimately they're going to keep the responsibility on the clinician if you're using it as a clinician. I think the question is, what if there isn't a clinician involved necessarily? What if it's the consumer going directly to whatever it is? And I assume if there's companies that are offering a bespoke version of it for behavioral health or whatever, that there is going to be a clinician somehow in that process that is responsible. Even if they're not directly involved in that interaction, they'll ultimately be responsible for it, which is, I think, a concern on the part of a lot of doctors.
So as you know, with transformers, it's really hard for them to say, I don't know, because that's not how the loss function was built. So we can kind of minimize hallucinations, and but it every time like AI model tries to give an answer. So even if it's not completely confident, and that's, I think, a big issue. What I've heard is actually related to this article is that I don't know, maybe it's rumors, but following all this suicide cases, unfortunately, with users using ChatGPT, OpenAI decided to kind of minimize the use cases for healthcare. So I don't know if it's kind of anecdotal, but like yesterday, I took a photo of a mall. I think in the old days when I asked something about like some picture or like something on my skin, it would say something. But this time it actually said, refer to a doctor, So maybe they did something. Maybe it's like what is like ChatGPT 5.1 or something. Maybe they did something, but I don't know. I mean, obviously they're looking into that. They're not stupid. But I don't know if they're gonna solve it, sort of the right way. So until then, I think everybody's supposed to be careful when they use these models. But I do believe that patients need to have information. I was listening to Open Evidence interview to Hello Tech's podcast yesterday. I didn't like his answer. The founder's answer that to the question, why aren't you letting patients use your engine? And he basically said that, well, we want to be careful because like we don't want to, providers have like 15 minutes for a visit. We don't want them to like spend 12 minutes or something, or was like 15 minutes out of 20 or something, discussing ChatGPT outputs, which to me is kind of like strange answer. But I think people need to have information, but it's up to the AI model providers to kind of explain when and in under which circumstances it needs to be used. So guardrails are really important.
What also drives me nuts is if you say, let's say you share an article about like patients using OpenAI or ChatGPT, like the first thing that some people will say is like, oh my God, it's not HIPAA compliant and it's not safe. And it's like, dude, like if the other option is, or the alternative is like bad or it's nothing because healthcare is freaking expensive in the US, like who cares about HIPAA? Like, here is my entire medical history. I dump it in ChatGPT and I get an answer. Or I can wait 6 months to see a specialist. Like that's also like a question that we need to ask ourselves as an industry. Like the alternative is not there either. So like we shouldn't say like you cannot use ChatGPT, but we should indeed come with an alternative that is much better than ChatGPT and it's more like created by physicians. And I do agree that open evidence would be a cool option for that. So it's indeed disappointing to hear that they don't want to do that.
When the convenience factor is so high, I think people are more willing to, take that risk or give information. It's the same thing, using your GPS or using Google Maps, the convenience factor is so high that you don't maybe think about, or maybe you care, maybe you don't care. Usually you don't, that, Google knows exactly where you're going every single day and, knows your pattern. The same thing. That's the trade-off of, I have this readily available, tool that's going to spend as much time with me as I need. It's going to let me ask whatever questions I need to ask. And that's the trade-off for giving up some of my privacy. It's obviously an indictment of the system, but I think people are obviously going to make that decision. It's a whole separate discussion of why we got to the point where it's 5-minute office visits and, how do we fix that? But, people are obviously making the decision to give up some privacy for the convenience.
And maybe a question to you, Ben. So one of my assumptions why Open Evidence doesn't want to go into the consumer space is because they will just piss off physicians. Like imagine like patients using Open Evidence from like a patient perspective. They get good advice and they say like, I'm not going to a physician. Like this was great advice. I don't need my physician. So how would you look like? Imagine you're a physician, you're using Open Evidence, and then you suddenly see the announcement of like, Open Evidence has now a consumer application, and you can ask all your like, how would you be? Like, this is cool, or would you be like,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most physicians would think of it in terms of competition, like, hey, open evidence is a consumer-facing thing, and now my practice is going to dry up. I think the demand is still going to be there. I think there might be some pushback of, it's like Dr. Google, on steroids. So it's not just Dr. Google, but it's Dr. Google with actual like studies and very detailed studies. And that could be like, I'm going to have to spend all my time going through the details of each particular study that surfaced. Maybe part of it too is they're trying to differentiate themselves as being more medically focused and not consumer focused, so they don't get kind of sucked into that same orbit as ChatGPT or Claude. But I don't think at this point most doctors would see open evidence as competition. Maybe they should, but I don't think they would see it that way.
And one cool alternative is Doctronic AI. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but it's sort of like they do an intake via AI, and then they also give you advice, but then they also help you schedule an appointment with a primary care physician or with a specialist. So that could also be an open evidence play. Like we give you the insights, and then we help you with getting to the right type of access. But yeah, I'm freewheeling. Sorry.
Let's kind of finish our discussion about OpenAI, and we've talked a lot about it, but I'll share one more news on this. So you mentioned, some of you already mentioned mental health in context of AI, and Ben, you mentioned liability. So ChatGPT posted this, that they work with more than 170 mental health experts to help ChatGPT more reliably recognize signs of distress, respond with care, and guide people toward real-world support, reducing the responses that fall short for desired behavior by 65 to 80%. And then, hold on, how do I switch? And then just literally a day later, OpenAI faces 7 lawsuits claiming ChatGPT drove people to suicide delusions. What do you think, guys?
I think it depends on whether you're a cynic or not. The cynic would say that this is obviously an empty response to the lawsuits. If you're not a cynic, you would say that this is them understanding that people are using it for this a lot, and it's incumbent upon them to put some guardrails in place.
To me, this is just like liability management and PR bullshit almost. Like the article in itself, like they say, like we worked with 170 experts, and then they call it
Who are
progress.
this? Who are the
Yeah,
experts? Like, how much time they work with them? Like, there are so many questions about this. I
yeah. So
agree.
they don't mention like full time, part time, an hour a day. Like we don't know anything. So it's sort of like, yeah, I can also say I worked with 170 experts on whatever. Um, that makes like no sense. And then you see all of these news of like AI researchers getting hundreds of millions to work at one of like OpenAI, Meta, or whatever. But like for mental health, you have 170 consultants. Like you probably have some money to spend on actual full-time people that spend their full-time mental brain juices on figuring out how to make this work from a mental health perspective. But clearly mental health is like a second tier type of priority, and not something they care about. Like ChatGPT was launched November 30th, 2022. We're now almost 3 years later, and now they hired 170 mental health experts. So I think what will happen is every 6 months they will dump a new blog post saying like, we have another 170 mental health experts that looked at our model and it's still working as expected, and then that's it, which is obviously disappointing. And that's also why I'm very bullish on people building in the mental health space and actually just have a dedicated focus, and also very transparent focus on what they're doing and how it's going.
They've already done that with Hellbench, remember, several months ago? Same thing. They hired some experts. And again, I feel like it's, I don't know, OpenAI is a bit of reactive. I wish they were more proactive. After something happens, they're like, oh, look, but we're doing something like that. They also had a model called AI Consult, which is funny enough, kind of like in reaction to the hallucination problem. They're saying, oh, now we have a model who's AI model who's going to correct mistakes of our chat GPT. It's like AI on top of AI, which is, to me, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. That's why I'm kind of looking forward to like next generation of AI. This is like fixing like quick fixes, especially in healthcare. I feel like they're not going to work.
Well, but yet, ChatGPT may be the largest provider of mental health support in the United States. So I don't think we can. We gotta face the fact that people are still gonna use ChatGPT for mental support for sure. And talking more about more bigger picture, what I think about AI in mental health. And when I hear people saying that AI is not ready, and then I give you an example, I'm coming from the country with 40 million people with PTSD from Ukraine, and there is no way we're ever going to find that many professionals who can provide enough of support. So AI has to step up, and technology has to step up. The question is how we do this, and should we do that? I mean, we definitely should, but how do we do it correctly? What do you think?
Yeah, I think just basically boils down to, do they want to do it correctly? There's a lot of pressure, to grow and move fast and do things quickly. Or do you want to kind of slow down and take the time to do it the right way, however you want to define it the right way, put the proper guardrails in place? And that's I think the constant friction between technology and healthcare is healthcare constantly wants to pump the brakes, but technology constantly wants to go fast, particularly in something as competitive and as as much money flying around AI right now that you fall half a step behind and you've fallen really 10 steps behind, the way that things are moving. So it's just that constant tension of balancing the safety and slowness of healthcare versus how fast things have to move in technology. And I don't know if you can force that. I don't know if you can regulate it. I don't know if you can expect, those companies, people internally to have that, lever inside their brain to pull back, or how you kind of force it to be done safely and appropriately.
Some states are trying. Illinois banned AI therapy already. What do you think? Should it be state-wise, or should we come up with something on the federal level?
I think the federal level, they're trying to overrun or overturn the state level, limitations on AI. So there's always, that's the tension too. And then, as we've seen with social media, you can put these, guardrails in place, but oftentimes they're very easy to bypass. How do you enforce it? What are the penalties? Is it a slap on the wrist? Is it something that's really going to move the needle in terms of when people slip up?
We have same problems in rural areas, like people don't have access to physicians. They're 100 miles sometimes from medical offices. So to me, I mean, we're all criticizing AI, but like to me, if you can get somebody on the phone or whatever, I would use AI agent all day long, just to get some information. I mean, obviously there needs to be guardrails, but to have some reasonable answer on a medically tested, maybe not FDA approved, but obviously from some, I don't know, well-known provider who did the test, and it's better than having no advice at all, in my opinion. There are people who are, as I said, like miles away, not only mental health, but even primary care. So it's a big problem in this country, and I think AI is one of the solutions for sure.
Yeah, and the counterpoint is that there's plenty of variability in the human element of how good of, mental health care you're getting, the recommendations. So, the human part of it's not infallible either. We shouldn't pretend that it is. The counter argument to that is that there's some accountability there. People would also say, well, maybe there's not enough accountability on the human side. So, we're not flawless on the traditional side either.
All right, let's move to the next one, the next news, and let's talk for a sec about CMS released calendar year 2026 Medicare physician fee schedule final rule, and basically with 2.5 efficiency adjustments to work RVUs on many non-time-based services, telehealth and student care management behavioral codes are excluded. Ben, can you explain us what that means and who's squeezed most by the 2.5% adjustment?
Yeah, this is like, the right around the holidays, the thing that all doctors await with bated breath, the CMS final rule. So essentially it's a 2.5% efficiency cut, and it's going to affect people that do procedures mostly. So orthopedic, any surgeon, anybody like cardiologist or gastroenterologist that does procedures. And the argument is that technology has made us more efficient, experience has made us more efficient, therefore it's not as hard or time consuming to do these procedures. So, we're going to pay you less and we're going to pay primary care doctors more. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about trying to figure out ways to incentivize primary care and disincentivize procedural care, because there's a gap and imbalance in how they're paid. And it's essentially zero-sum game. So if you're going to pay primary care doctors more, you have to pay proceduralists less. And this is the mechanism by which they've chosen to do it. You can argue whether that's going to be effective, but that's kind of the goal. And I think the other goal is to try to get specialist procedurals into more sort of value-based care arrangements and away from fee-for-service. I think the key is you have to give them value-based care models that work in order to facilitate that shift.
I think overall this intention on trying to force the system to move to value-based care is it supposed to be like complete switch, or there's like minor steps like this that make sense and it's just gonna turn out eventually?
I think they would love it to be a complete switch. I mean, they've come out and said, by 2030, which is now, 5 years away, 4 years away, they want all the CMS beneficiaries in some form of accountable care. It's just, again, we haven't seen models that have been able to achieve the savings that providers want to stay in. You can force them into these mandatory models, which they've tried, but we haven't hit on a mandatory model that's survived very long. Commercial insurance companies have been very slow to get on board as well. So I think, we keep talking about it, but we just have not been able to figure out a way to get from point A to point B. And the carrots are getting smaller and the sticks are getting bigger, but there still isn't as much movement despite that. So.
Ben, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have any idea what that means for ASCs? Because based on what I could tell, but I don't know much about it, it's sort of like they got double hit as well. But wondering how you're looking at that and how do you think they will respond? Will they try to push more surgeries in a given day? Will they do some other things?
Yeah, so ASCs didn't necessarily get directly hit by this. I mean, they came out and said that they cut it because they said if you're in a facility, you're sort of double counting your overhead. If you're doing the facility is already paid for, so we're going to pay you less if you're in a facility because you're getting double paid for the facility. ASCs, that's not going to affect as much. Typically, every year they've increased the reimbursement for like the facility fee for ASC a little bit every year. So I think they're trying to push cases to the ASC. It may hit physicians that are employed by hospitals and health systems and do their cases in a hospital or health system facility more than an ASC situation. But I mean, the second part stands that the more you kind of squeeze the reimbursement, the reaction has to be either I'm just going to make less or I'm going to do more. And reimbursement's not keeping up with inflation, so I have to do even more. And the question is, are we creating this paradox of incentivizing more by paying less and this kind of race to the bottom that's ultimately going to drive up the cost of care if you just kind of kept payment the same, or you incentivize people to, or didn't incentivize them to have to do more? We are ultimately better off that way, but that's not the path they've chosen to take.
Wouldn't this also push some primary care doctors toward more like concierge service and direct primary care?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a concern. So, this...
at some point, the threshold is am I getting be underpaid, or maybe I should just... Yes, I'm going to lose some patients probably because patients would be sticking with their payers, but you're getting to the point where it's how long can I take this?
Yeah, you could definitely, crunch the numbers and say, yes, if I opt out, my volume, my patient panel might get cut in half, but if I'm getting paid 2.5 times more by doing that,
right,
then the math obviously makes sense. The changes are intended to pay primary care doctors more. I don't think it's enough that it's going to, meaningfully move the needle on paying primary care doctors more. I think you are going to increasingly hear specialists threaten to drop out of Medicare and not accept Medicare because then the financials are rapidly reaching the point where it just doesn't make sense. I mean, that's been threatened for a long time, but I think we're getting closer and closer to specialists not accepting Medicare, which isn't good for anybody for access.
Let's move to the next news. And it's kind of old news, to be honest. I'll give you the context. So in late August, after the UGM conference organized by Epic, everybody started talking because they found out that Epic is going to work with Microsoft on their AI scribe tool. And everybody started talking what's going to happen with other AI scribe tools out there, Nebula's, Abridges, and others in this world. And then everybody talking about this for a month and then starting to kind of forget about this a little bit. But then another article came out that's saying that Epic actually had some stakes in Abridge and sold it. And to be honest, I don't think we still know if they sold it after the announcement or before. But the whole fact that they had some stakes in a startup that they worked with together on building an AI scribe tool, and then they decided to go with another vendor, there's a lot of questions to ask here. But Sergei, what do you think of general of this situation?
It's hard to actually tell what the truth is, because I talk to different people and it's almost like they have opposite views on this. First of all, it's kind of strange, right? That Judy Faulkner for her whole career with Epic, basically saying, we're never going to be in business of whatever mergers and acquisitions. We're never going to acquire anybody. And all of a sudden, turned out to actually, do buy some shares, whatever. When we were at Health in Vegas, actually, remember I told you I stopped by Abridge's, kiosk, which is quite big at the conference. You can see it from anywhere. And actually, I asked like 3 different people, and all of them, they're biased, obviously, but they're like, no. I mean, what are you talking about? Like, we don't know anything about this equity sale. We actually continue our partnership with Epic. So I don't know if it's like, preset answer that they're supposed to say to people, but
not just to people, to you, a person who writes article on this.
Was your picture up in the booth somewhere?
Well,
like, do not talk to this individual.
Everything's okay here. Nothing to see here. Yeah, exactly. But I feel like, I don't know, my personal opinion, and maybe I'm sort of just an optimist here, but I think obviously from what I've seen, Abridge has better technology. They Epic went with Microsoft's Copilot, I guess it's called now, product, because it's safer. I actually wrote an article about this, and if you're Judy, obviously you're going with an option where you're going with a kind of larger, well-known partner that is not going to be bought, obviously, because it's Microsoft by a competitor. So that's one positive. It's a partnership, so hopefully they're going to be kind of on their side. And the only concern that Judy has is that Microsoft at some point is going to say, well, why are we even partnering? We're so big, and we have this technology, and I don't know what they're doing EHR, so we can probably build our own EHR system. So that's the concern for Judy, I think. But all in all, they went with Microsoft or Abridge just because of just pure name brand. But yeah, I mean, they may have sold equity, but again, Abridge doesn't seem to be concerned. They can continue their partnership. They're not going to be kicked out of their current situations in health systems, obviously, because Abridge is pretty popular in many healthcare systems. So I don't know.
Well,
there's a lot of rumors.
That's the question, Sergey. If Epic comes and says, "Hey, here's an AI scribe tool that we provide free of charge. You're already paying us as your EHR," would those health systems still continue using Abridge if that happens?
Yeah,
Rick,
it's a big
what do you
question.
think?
I'm going to refer to Rick for that answer.
I think it's what happened with first the caveat, I'm a big fan of Abridge. Also, I like Ambience and what they're doing, so I'm obviously biased. I think Epic not having any stake anymore in Abridge is a net positive for Abridge, and I think it's a power move, because I think what happened is they went to Epic, they signed this partnership deal, and suddenly they have equity. Probably they signed an insane revenue share deal on top of it, where Epic gets money whenever they refer hospitals to Abridge. So then Abridge, their growth motion was insane. They sold to all of these health systems, so they have the moat. And now they don't need Epic anymore because they have all the contracts. So they don't need to pay for the revenue share anymore. And they have all of the clients and the customer cases, and they can now go to other EHRs and say look, we're not biased and only tied to Epic anymore. We can also work with you. Because when Abridge launched their scribe a few years ago, their entire website was saying Epic, Epic, Epic. On the homepage, it was only talking about Epic. Now it's on the homepage, the main page, they don't mention Epic anymore. Only on the platform page they mention Epic, and they don't mention any other EHRs for whatever reason. But in short, I think it's a big win for Abridge to lose that partnership with Epic in that relationship, because it will open many more doors. And then second, in terms of adoption, if you look at the adoption rate of an Ambience and Abridge versus a Copilot or any other, there are some very shitty scribes on the market. The difference is huge, because it's not just the people are always saying all my LinkedIn comments AI scribe, building an AI scribe is so easy. It's definitely not easy, because the scribing is one piece to it. Summarizing in the way that Dr. Ben likes his writing is another very painful thing. Physicians have very strong opinions on how they want their notes to be structured, and it's extremely painful to take all of these opinions into account. I don't want to build that. And then lastly, they're all like very deep into revenue cycle management. That's also like how Ambience is obviously growing. They're perfected the art of taking the scribe node and then billing it, or like making sure that it's built in the right way. So like the moat is not the node. That the moat is not the node. That's a nice one. It's like what comes downstream from that. And I don't think Microsoft will ever be able to get to the speed that Ambience or Abridge or Nambla have ever. And so they will buy one eventually. And for that to happen, first the founders of these AI scribes need to step out of their delusional valuations and actually get to a price that makes sense, because right now they're like crazy. But when that happens in 2 years, I think we will definitely see some consolidation, and Microsoft will be the first to consolidate.
No, I mean, claiming that it's a win for Abridge, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like Judy has a lot of connections in Washington, so I don't know that. It's a better product, and to the point of like whether it's an AI scribe. Actually, I've already heard several times, Shiv Rao, CEO of Abridge, basically saying, "We're not a scribe product. We are a coding and billing product." So he keeps saying, you call us scribe, we're not. We're actually medical billing, device, so company. So, but yeah, in terms of technology, I totally agree with Rick. It's like night and day compared to what Microsoft has right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Epic playbook obviously was to, make the switching costs so high and penetrate the market that it's almost impossible and extremely expensive to unwind from Epic. And I guess you could argue, a Bridge or something like that would do the same thing. You penetrate the market, you get physicians, clinicians comfortable using it. You tell them you're going to switch to something else, you're going to get a lot of pushback, productivity is going to drop. So maybe just having that market penetration and making the switching cost so high, because you have done the hard work of making this attractive to your clinicians to use it, will be a moat for a Bridge. And then you add the RCM piece, so you keep the administrators, the bean counters happy, you keep the docs happy, they get to keep the tool that they like, and they've put a lot of time and investment to getting to work for them, and you keep the bean counters happy by doing just like Epic, adding the billing RCM layer to it to justify the cost.
All right, gentlemen, I think we had a great first episode discussing news. Thank you so much. We are a little over 1 month before New Year's. Any big announcements you want to say? I don't know, but your work you do, or anything, any news you expect happening in December? Anything?
Plugging away.
Well, digital health inside out continues to grow, right? I don't know.
That's the biggest news for sure.
That's
All right.
the biggest one.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Yeah, take care.